If stories of quiet rebellion and rediscovered strength stir your soul, smash subscribe now for weekly waves of whispered wisdom from real hearts. My name is Olivia, and if I ever had doubts about where I truly stood in my family, those doubts vanished the day I discovered the will. There was no dramatic announcement, no emotional sit-down, no warning at all. I didn't even hear it from my parents. I found out by accident through nothing more than bad timing and blind luck. A few months ago, I was at my parents' house, the same house I had been helping them hold on to for the last 5 years. I helped cover the mortgage whenever it fell behind. I paid for groceries more times than I could count. I fixed things when they broke. I was the one quietly keeping everything from falling apart. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. I did all of that while my younger sister, Mia, did absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing at all. No job, no bills, no responsibilities. She slept late, drifted through her days, and waited for life to reward her for simply existing. And somehow my parents were more than happy to support that. That afternoon, my dad asked me to help him with paperwork. As usual, neither he nor my mom wanted to deal with anything involving documents or technology. He asked me to scan a stack of papers for him. Legal papers, financial forms, routine things. I didn't think twice about it until I noticed a folder in the pile. It was labeled Estate Plan. I hesitated. I'm not the kind of person who snoops, but curiosity crept in quietly. I had been financially supporting this household for years. Wondering how things were arranged for the future didn't feel unreasonable. So I opened it and my stomach dropped. Everything was going to the house, the savings, every asset. My name appeared only once, buried in a generic sentence about loving both daughters equally. Equally. I stared at the page, feeling foolish. Years of helping, years of sacrifice, years of being dependable. And I wasn't even an afterthought. I was a technicality. I sat there holding the papers, my hands trembling, not from shock alone, but from betrayal. How long had they planned this? Had I always been nothing more than their safety net, their solution when things got hard? My dad noticed I wasn't scanning anything. "Olivia, what's taking so long?" he asked as he walked back into the room. I didn't hide the document. I held it up and looked him straight in the eye. "So this is how it is," I said, my voice steady. "Everything goes to Mia." For a moment his face went pale. Then he sighed. The way someone sighs when they're annoyed, not remorseful. "It's not what you think," he muttered. "Really," I said, "because it looks very clear." He shifted in place. "It's complicated." That was all. No explanation, no apology, just the quiet expectation that I would drop it and continue doing what I'd always done. I called for my mom. When she walked in and saw the will in my hands, guilt flickered across her face, but it didn't last. "Olivia," she said gently, "you don't need the inheritance. You're independent. You're doing well. Mia struggles. We just want to make sure she's taken care of." That was the moment something inside me went still. They knew exactly what they were doing. I placed the papers back on the table, took a slow breath, and nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. "Now I understand." Then I walked out of the house. And that was the last time I helped them hold it together. I didn't go back to my parents' house after that day. I didn't call. I didn't check in. For the first time in years, I stopped fixing their problems. I let them sit with the consequences of their own decisions. No more grocery runs. No more emergency payments. No more late-night calls asking me to just handle it. If something broke, they would have to figure it out. If bills piled up, they would have to deal with them. And if the mortgage notice showed up in the mail, it would no longer be my responsibility. At first, there was silence. It lasted about 2 weeks. I imagined they thought I was just upset, that I'd cool off and come back like I always did, that I'd apologize for being emotional and resume my role as their reliable backup plan. But then the silence broke. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my dad. "The property taxes are due." That was it. No greeting, no acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology, just a cold transactional reminder, as if nothing had changed. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Part of me was almost impressed by the audacity. They truly believed I would keep paying no matter what they decided about my place in the family. I typed back slowly. "I'm sure Mia will handle it since the house is hers." 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mom," I let it ring. Then another text appeared. "Olivia, please don't be like this. We need to talk." Now they wanted to talk now that money was involved. I waited before replying. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. That should have ended it, but it didn't. That evening, my sister finally decided to involve herself. Why are you being so dramatic? Mia texted. It's not that serious. Just help them out like you always do. I almost laughed. I typed back. I think you've got it covered. She responded immediately. Are you seriously mad about the will? Grow up. It's just money, just money. It was easy to say when it wasn't coming out of her pocket. Then you won't mind paying the mortgage, I replied. Silence. A few minutes later, my mom texted again, this time laying on the guilt. We're your parents. Family takes care of each other. We did so much for you growing up. That message hit harder than I expected. I had to take a breath before responding. You made it clear I wasn't family when you left me out of the will. Mia can take care of you now. Not long after, my dad chimed in. We're not asking for much, just enough to cover things for a few months. Don't be selfish. Selfish? I felt something snap. I had spent years sacrificing my time, money, and energy for them. And now, because I finally said no, I was selfish. I typed back one sentence. I'm done. Then I turned my phone off. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a notification, a bank transfer request from my mom. No explanation, no message, just a request for $3,500, the exact amount they needed to cover the overdue mortgage. I stared at it in disbelief, then declined it. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Mom, I ignored it. Another text followed. I know you saw the request. Why did you decline it? Because it's not my responsibility, I replied. Try Mia. Another call, another message. We're going to lose the house if you don't help us. That was when I knew they hadn't learned anything at all. Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding I didn't matter, I wrote back. Then my dad sent one final message. You're really going to let your parents become homeless. That message didn't hurt. It confirmed everything. They weren't scared. They weren't desperate. They were angry that their safety net had finally disappeared. I didn't respond. And that's when they decided to escalate. I was at work the next afternoon when my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another call I didn't want to deal with. But something told me to answer. Hi, this is the front desk at your apartment building, the woman said carefully. Olivia, your parents are here. I froze. They're asking to see you, she added. They're saying it's an emergency and that you won't answer their calls. My stomach tightened. They had actually come to my apartment. Please don't let them up, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not expecting them. There was a brief pause. They're being persistent. I don't care, I replied. They need to leave. I hung up, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from anger. The sheer audacity of it all made my chest feel tight. Showing up uninvited, trying to corner me in my own home, all because I stopped paying their bills. A text from my mom appeared almost immediately. We're downstairs. Open the door. No greeting, no apology, just another command. I didn't reply. Another message followed. We're not leaving until you talk to us. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. They weren't going to stop. Fine. If they wanted to confront me, I wasn't going to hide. I grabbed my keys and headed downstairs. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I saw them. My mom, my dad, and of course, Mia. They stood together like a united front as if they were staging some kind of intervention. My mom's arms were crossed, her face already twisted into that familiar look of disappointment. My dad stood rigidly beside her, jaw clenched, eyes hard. And Mia leaned against the wall, scrolling on her phone, looking bored, as if this entire situation were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. When my mom spotted me, she stepped forward immediately. Olivia, finally, she said. We need to talk. I stopped a few feet away, not bothering to soften my tone. No, I said calmly, you need to leave. She blinked, genuinely stunned. Excuse me, you heard me. I replied. You don't get to show up at my apartment and demand money. My dad scoffed. So you're really going to let us lose the house over this? Over a grudge? I let out a short, humorless laugh. A grudge, I said. You mean the part where I paid your bills for years and you decided I wasn't worth including in your future? That's not fair. My mom snapped. We did what was best for the family. I tilted my head. You mean what was best for Mia? The silence that followed was heavy. Mia finally looked up from her phone. I don't even want to be involved in this, she said. I didn't ask for any of this. I turned to her slowly. No, I said, you just accepted it. Her expression hardened. What do you want me to do? I took a step closer. You're an adult. You want the house, start acting like a homeowner. Get a job, pay the bills, stop expecting everyone else to carry you. She looked away. My mom inhaled sharply. She's your sister and I've supported her longer than anyone else, I replied. My dad's voice grew sharper. You're being selfish. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. You decided she deserved everything, I said. You decided I deserved nothing, and now you're angry because I won't clean up the mess that choice created. My mom tried one last time. We thought you'd be mature about this. Mature, I repeated. You mean quietly accept being used. My dad stepped forward, trying to intimidate me the way he used to when I was younger. We raised you, he said. The least you can do is help us. I already did, I replied evenly. For years. No one spoke. I looked at all three of them and felt something unexpected. Clarity, we're done, I said. I turned, walked back inside, and let the door close behind me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I had barely made it back to my couch when my phone buzzed, a message from my dad. After everything we've done for you, you're really going to abandon us. I stared at the screen, then typed back calmly. You abandoned me. I'm just finally accepting it. I sent the message, then blocked his number. I blocked my mom. I blocked Mia. I sat there for a long moment, phone in my hand, half expecting to feel panic or regret. Instead, I felt quiet. I thought blocking them would be the end of it. I was wrong. Less than a day later, I opened Facebook and immediately regretted it. My parents had never been especially tech-savvy, but when it came to public guilt trips, they were suddenly experts. My mom had posted a long emotional message about how she didn't raise her daughter to be so selfish and how true family shows up when it matters. The comments were already piling up. Friends of hers, distant relatives, people who knew nothing about what had actually happened. So sad to see children forget their parents. You only get one family. This breaks my heart. Then my dad posted his own message. Some people turn their backs when you need them most. We gave everything to our children, and this is how we're repaid. He tagged me. That's when my chest tightened. But the final straw came when I saw Mia's post. She shared something about real love and sacrifice, talking about how she would do anything for our parents and how some people only care about money. She didn't use my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. I stared at my screen, stunned by how quickly the story had been rewritten. Somehow I was now the villain, the cold, heartless daughter who had abandoned her struggling parents, the selfish one who refused to help. I closed the app and sat in silence. For a while, I told myself to ignore it, to be the bigger person, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I stayed silent, their version would become the truth. So I opened Facebook again. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't lash out. I told the truth. I wrote about the years I had paid bills, the groceries, the repairs, the support. I explained that I discovered I had been left out of the will entirely and that my parents expected me to continue financing their lives anyway. I wrote that family should be built on mutual respect, not obligation. I didn't attack. I didn't beg for sympathy. I just explained why I stepped back. Then I hit post. Almost immediately, messages started coming in, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, old family friends, even a few of my parents' acquaintances. I had no idea. I'm sorry you went through that. You did more than enough. But the backlash came just as fast. Mia messaged me, furious, accusing me of betrayal. My dad left a voicemail yelling that I had humiliated them. My mom sent a long message about how I had destroyed the family. I didn't reply. I blocked them again. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of my apartment. For the first time in years, there was no one demanding anything from me, no one expecting me to fix their problems. It felt unfamiliar. And then it felt like relief, but I had no idea yet how far they were willing to go or what cutting them off would actually cost. The days after that were strangely calm. Too calm. I went to work. I came home. I cooked simple meals. I slept through the night without my phone lighting up every few hours with another crisis that wasn't really a crisis at all. For the first time in years, my life felt quiet, but I knew better than to trust that silence. It broke a few days later when I got a message from a number I hadn't blocked. It was an aunt I barely spoke to. Your mother is devastated, she wrote. She hasn't been eating. This is breaking her heart. I didn't respond. Then another message came in. A cousin, you know how they are, they don't mean harm, just help them until things settle down. Then another, family forgives. Each message followed the same pattern. No one asked what had happened. No one asked how I felt. They just wanted me to smooth things over, to restore the balance that made everyone else comfortable. I started realizing something important. My family didn't want peace. They wanted access. A few nights later, I got an email from my building management. There had been a complaint. Apparently, someone had called claiming they were worried about my mental health, that I had been acting erratically and cutting off family suddenly. They suggested a wellness check might be necessary. I stared at the screen, my hands going cold. I knew exactly who had done it. They couldn't get to me financially anymore. They couldn't reach me emotionally, so they were trying something else. Control. I immediately contacted management, explained the situation calmly, and made it clear that I was safe and did not consent to unannounced visits. Thankfully, they believed me, but the message was clear. They weren't done. The next escalation came through the mail, a letter from my parents' attorney. They weren't suing me, not yet, but the letter was full of carefully worded pressure. It mentioned familial obligations, past financial arrangements, and vague suggestions that I had made verbal commitments to assist them long-term. I read it twice, then laughed. They were trying to scare me into compliance. I took the letter to a lawyer the next day. I didn't even hesitate. He skimmed it, then looked up at me. "You're not legally obligated to do anything," he said. "They're fishing." That confirmation settled something deep in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was responding. I blocked the remaining relatives who kept messaging. I tightened my privacy settings. I stopped explaining myself, and slowly the noise began to fade. One evening, as I sat alone on my couch, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was grieving, but not for the people themselves. I was grieving the idea of a family I had spent years trying to earn my way into. And once I let that idea go, something shifted. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I stopped hoping they would suddenly understand. I started asking myself a different question. If I wasn't living for them anymore, who was I living for now? That was the moment I began rebuilding my life. Not around obligation, but around choice. And that choice was going to change everything once the noise finally died down. The quiet felt different. It wasn't just the absence of chaos. It was space. Space I hadn't had in years. And in that space, I started noticing how much of my life had been shaped around keeping everyone else comfortable. I began setting small boundaries first. I stopped checking my phone the moment I woke up. I stopped feeling guilty for leaving messages unanswered. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who were determined not to understand them. And slowly, something else became clear. I had been preparing my entire life for emergencies that were never mine. Every spare dollar had gone toward fixing someone else's problem. Every free weekend had been swallowed by responsibilities I never agreed to, but somehow inherited. Even my emotional energy had been rationed around what my parents or Mia might need next. Without that constant drain, I started seeing my own life more clearly. I realized how tired I had been, not physically, emotionally. There were nights I sat in my apartment, lights off, just listening to the city outside my window, cars passing, distant voices, the hum of something alive beyond the walls I had built around myself. And for the first time, I felt present. Then something unexpected happened. About a week after everything went quiet, I received a message from an unfamiliar account. No name, no photo. "Hey, it's Mia." I stared at it longer than I should have. I just wanted to say things are bad here. The message continued. "Mom's stressed, Dad's angry. They keep saying this is your fault." I didn't respond. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "They're talking about selling the house." That one gave me pause. Not because I felt responsible, but because it confirmed what I had suspected all along. The house had never been stable. "They want me to talk to you." Mia added, "They think I can fix this." I finally typed back, "You wanted the responsibility. This is what it looks like." There was no immediate reply. An hour later, she sent one more message. I didn't think it would be like this. I read that sentence over and over. She hadn't thought about it at all. I didn't answer. I blocked the account, not out of anger, but clarity. I wasn't going to be pulled back into the same cycle wearing a different mask. A few days later, I took my first real vacation in years. Not a big trip, just a quiet getaway. A small coastal town, long walks, early mornings, no obligations, no emergencies waiting in my inbox. I let myself rest. And during one of those quiet mornings, watching the sun rise over the water, I made a decision. I wasn't going to rebuild my old life. I was going to build something new, something that didn't require me to be exhausted to be loved. When I came back from that short trip, something in me had shifted. The city felt the same. My apartment looked the same. My routine hadn't changed much on the surface, but internally I was no longer bracing myself for impact. I started making decisions without running them through an imaginary filter of how my parents might react. I rearranged my schedule. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned years ago because they were impractical. I said no without explaining myself, and the world didn't fall apart. A few weeks passed before I heard anything else about the house. Not directly, never directly. Information reached me the way it always had, through sideways channels and half-true updates. An old family friend mentioned it casually during a phone call. They're having a hard time. She said, "Your parents are overwhelmed." Mia stressed. I listened quietly. Apparently, the bills hadn't stopped coming. The repairs I used to handle had been ignored. The money my parents assumed would always appear didn't. Mia, for the first time in her life, was being asked to step up. She didn't like it. She complained to anyone who would listen. She talked about how unfair it was, how none of this was what she signed up for, how she never asked to be responsible for everything. I almost smiled when I heard that, because neither had I. One evening as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. It was my dad. His voice sounded older, not softer, just tired. "We don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "You were always the strong one, the dependable one. We thought you'd handle things." I replayed that message more times than I'd like to admit. They hadn't relied on me because they respected me. They relied on me because I made it easy. That realization didn't hurt anymore. It just clarified everything. I deleted the voicemail and went on with my evening. That night I cooked dinner slowly, music playing softly in the background. No rushing, no multitasking, just me in my own space, choosing how to spend my time. As I sat down to eat, I realized something else. For the first time, my life felt like it belonged to me. Not borrowed, not conditional, not temporary, mine. And that scared me a little, but it also felt like freedom. Freedom has a strange way of revealing things you didn't know you were missing. Once I stopped being needed, I started noticing how often I had been used. Not in obvious ways, not with cruelty, but through expectation, through silence, through the quiet assumption that I would always step in. I thought back to holidays where I paid for groceries without anyone asking, to repairs I handled without being thanked, to emergencies that were never really emergencies, just inconveniences someone else didn't want to deal with. I had called it love, but love doesn't keep score the way my family did. Love doesn't disappear the moment you stop giving. That understanding settled slowly over days and weeks. I stopped checking my social media altogether. I didn't want updates filtered through pity or judgment. I didn't want to know who was saying what about me behind my back. I was tired of defending myself in rooms I wasn't even in. Instead, I focused on small, grounding routines. Morning coffee by the window, evening walks after work, cooking meals that took time instead of shortcuts. Simple things, ordinary things. One afternoon, I ran into a coworker I hadn't spoken to much before. We chatted briefly, then longer. She asked how I was doing, and for once I didn't give the automatic answer. "I'm rebuilding," I said. She smiled. That's usually the best phase that stuck with me. Rebuilding didn't mean fixing what was broken. It meant deciding what was worth keeping. Month passed, then another. I didn't hear from my parents again, not directly, but I heard enough. The house was officially listed for sale. They couldn't keep up with the payments. The repairs had piled up. The safety net was gone, and reality had stepped in without hesitation. Mia moved out not long after she went to stay with a friend, then another, then another. Responsibility, it turned out, was uncomfortable when it wasn't optional. For a brief moment, I felt something close to sadness. Not because of what they were losing, but because of what they had never tried to build. I wondered if they would ever understand, if there would come a moment of reflection, of regret. Then I realized something else. Understanding wasn't required for closure. I didn't need them to agree with my decision. I just needed to keep it. As more time passed, the urgency of everything began to fade. What once felt like a constant emergency slowly became background noise, then silence. And in that silence, I started noticing how much lighter my days felt. I wasn't bracing myself anymore. No more flinching when my phone buzzed. No more calculating how much I could spare before checking my own balance. No more emotional math. I started investing in myself in ways I never had before. I signed up for a class I'd always wanted to take but had convinced myself was unnecessary. I spent money on small comforts without guilt. A better mattress, fresh groceries, a haircut that wasn't rushed. None of it was extravagant, but it felt intentional. One evening, while sorting through old documents, I came across a notebook from years ago. Inside were lists, budgets, reminders, notes to myself. Most of them revolved around my parents' needs, mortgage amounts, due dates, repairs that needed to be scheduled, page after page of responsibility that wasn't mine. I closed the notebook and set it aside. That chapter was over. A few days later, a mutual acquaintance reached out, someone who knew my parents but wasn't particularly close to me. "I ran into your mom," she said cautiously. "She asked about you." I waited. "She said she doesn't recognize you anymore." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "That's probably true," I replied. What I didn't say was that I didn't recognize myself back then either. That version of me had been shaped by obligation, by fear of disappointing people who were never satisfied, by the belief that love had to be earned through sacrifice. I was unlearning all of that, and unlearning takes time. One night lying awake, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If my family had never needed me, who would I have become sooner? The answer didn't come immediately. But I knew I was finally giving myself the chance to find out. With distance came clarity, and with clarity came memories I had never fully examined before. Moments that once felt normal now looked different when I viewed them without obligation clouding my judgment. I remembered being praised for being low maintenance, for being understanding, for never asking for much. At the time, I thought those were compliments. Now I understood they were expectations. I had been easy to rely on because I never demanded space, never demanded fairness, never demanded anything at all. And the moment I finally did, by simply stepping back, I became the problem. That realization didn't make me angry anymore. It made me careful. Careful about who I gave my energy to. Careful about who had access to my time. Careful about who benefited from my silence. I began having deeper conversations with people in my life. Real conversations, not the polite, surface-level ones I had relied on for years. I told a close friend what had really happened with my family. She listened without interrupting, then said something simple. "They loved what you provided, not what you needed." That sentence stayed with me because it was true. Weeks later, I ran into someone from my past at the grocery store, a former neighbor who used to see me coming and going from my parents' house all the time. "You look different," she said. I smiled. "I feel different." She hesitated. "Your parents, they're struggling." I nodded. "I know you don't feel bad," she asked carefully. I considered the question honestly before answering. "I feel sad," I said, "but I don't feel responsible." That distinction mattered. Feeling empathy didn't mean surrendering boundaries. Caring didn't mean self-erasure. I could wish them well without returning to the role that had slowly hollowed me out. That night, I wrote something down in a notebook, something I wanted to remember. I am allowed to choose peace, even if others call it abandonment. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. By the time autumn arrived, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt steady and intentional. The urgency that once defined my days was gone, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Confidence. I stopped expecting chaos. And when you stop expecting chaos, you stop attracting it. I hadn't heard from my parents or Mia in months. Not directly, not indirectly. No new messages from relatives trying to mediate. No updates passed along out of concern. The story had lost its audience, and without attention, it seemed to finally lose momentum. One evening, as I was leaving work, I ran into an old friend from high school. We hadn't spoken in years, but we decided to grab coffee. Conversation flowed easily, drifting from memories to where life had taken us. At one point, she asked, "Do you ever think about going back, fixing things with your family?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the version of reconciliation people usually imagine. Apologies that never really come. Promises that sound good but change nothing. Boundaries quietly erased in the name of keeping the peace. "I think about peace," I said slowly, "but not the kind that requires me to disappear." She nodded like she understood more than she let on. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on how much my definition of family had changed. It wasn't about blood anymore. It was about reciprocity, about being seen, about safety. I had built a small circle of people who didn't ask me to prove my worth. People who didn't treat my strength as a resource to exploit, and that felt enough. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when grief resurfaced. Not for what I lost, but for what never existed in the first place. A family that protected instead of consumed. Parents who chose fairness over convenience. I let myself feel that grief without rushing past it. Healing, I was learning, wasn't about pretending things didn't hurt. It was about choosing not to reopen wounds that had finally begun to close. Healing didn't arrive all at once. Came in small, almost unnoticeable moments. In the way I no longer flinched when someone asked me for help. in the way I paused before saying yes, in the way I checked in with myself first. I started noticing how deeply the old patterns had been wired into me. Any request still triggered an instinct to over-explain. Any disagreement still made my chest tighten. Any hint of disappointment still whispered that I was failing someone. But now I recognized those reactions for what they were. Echoes, they weren't warnings. They were remnants of a life I no longer lived. One evening while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old envelope addressed in my mom's handwriting. Inside was a list, expenses I had covered over the years. Mortgage payments, utility bills, repairs, groceries. Each item had a small check mark next to it. I stared at the paper for a long time. This wasn't gratitude. It was accounting. I folded the paper once and threw it away. That night, I stood by my window watching the city lights come on one by one. I thought about how many people lived inside those buildings carrying invisible histories, quiet boundaries, unresolved pain. I wasn't unique, but I was choosing differently. A few days later, I got an unexpected email. It wasn't from family. It wasn't from anyone connected to them at all. It was from a colleague who had recently gone through something similar, being cut off after refusing to keep supporting relatives financially. She wrote, "I heard you went through something hard and stood your ground. I just wanted to say thank you. It helped me do the same." I read that message twice. For so long, I had been told that stepping back made me selfish, that choosing myself was a moral failure. But here was proof that boundaries didn't just protect the person setting them. They gave others permission to do the same. That realization stayed with me. Maybe the story didn't end with loss. Maybe it ended with clarity, and maybe that was enough. By winter, the sharp edges of everything had softened. The pain hadn't vanished completely, but it no longer dictated my thoughts. It no longer followed me into every quiet moment. I had built routines that belonged only to me. Saturday mornings were slow and intentional. Sunday evenings were for reflection, not dread. My calendar was no longer filled with obligations disguised as favors. And then unexpectedly, I saw them again. Not in person, not directly. I ran into a neighbor of my parents at a local store. She recognized me immediately and hesitated before speaking, as if weighing whether she should say anything at all. "They sold the house," she said gently. I nodded. I already knew, but hearing it out loud felt different. "They moved into a smaller place," she continued. "Your parents, Mia isn't with them anymore." I thanked her for telling me and wished her well. We parted ways, and I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, absorbing the information. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt. I felt distance. Not emotional distance, clarity. Their choices had finally met reality, and for the first time, it wasn't my job to soften the landing. That night, I thought about how easily everything could have gone differently, how one honest conversation, one fair decision could have changed the outcome. But fairness would have required them to see me as more than a solution, and they never had. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the quiet. The same quiet that once felt empty now felt full, full of agency, full of peace, full of my own presence. I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I had already given it to myself. As the year came to a close, I noticed something subtle but important. My thoughts no longer circled back to them the way they used to. I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head. I wasn't imagining what I would say if we ever talked again. The story had stopped looping. That didn't mean I had erased them from my life. It meant they no longer occupied the center of it. I began making plans that extended further into the future than I ever had before. Not emergency plans, not backup plans, real ones, trips I wanted to take, goals I wanted to work toward. A version of my life that wasn't built around being available at all times. I started saving money without a secret sense of dread, without the expectation that it would soon disappear into someone else's crisis. I invested in my own stability, my own growth, my own peace. And with that came a quiet confidence. I no longer needed to prove that I was a good daughter or a good sister or a good person. I knew who I was. There were still moments of sadness, usually late at night, when I thought about what could have been. But those moments passed more quickly now. They no longer pulled me backward. Instead, they reminded me why I had chosen this path in the first place. Because love without respect is not love. Because sacrifice without recognition becomes self-erasure. Because choosing yourself is not cruelty, it's survival. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't need to. For the first time, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than fear, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever hear from my parents or my sister again. Maybe one day they'll reach out with something that sounds like understanding. Maybe they won't. Either way, I've stopped building my life around that possibility. I've learned that peace doesn't come from fixing what refuses to change. It comes from stepping away and choosing something better for yourself, even when that choice is misunderstood. There are still days when I think about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love meant endurance, the one who thought being needed was the same as being valued. I don't judge her anymore. She did the best she could with what she knew, but I'm not her now. Now I choose relationships that don't require me to disappear. I choose stability over chaos. I choose quiet over constant obligation. And I choose myself without apology. If you listen to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, if you're still here, write in the comments, where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. This chapter of my life didn't end with reconciliation or dramatic closure. It ended with something far more important: clarity. I finally understood that I was never selfish for stepping back. I was simply done setting myself on fire to keep others warm. And once I accepted that, everything else fell into place. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.